Aloha and welcome, ladies and germs, to another installment of Live from the Studio, the Daily Edition, with me, your host, Jimmy Selesky. How we all feeling? Happy Monday to you. Today I want to talk a little bit, maybe even a lot of bit, about a clip that just came across my desk. I believe it's from over the weekend, but it should be no surprise that I didn't hear about it or find out about it until today. Kind of lose track of all time over the weekends, which is not the worst thing in the world. But this clip really piqued my interest. This is RFK Jr., or as some really cool people call him, Bobby Kennedy. Because, you know, we all know him from way back when. RFK, I call him Bobby Kennedy. Whatever, we're cool. So I guess I'm going to stick with RFK, though, because I don't want to be, I'm not trying to cap. I never met him. He made an appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher, New Rule, on Saturday. And the topic of vaccines came up, unsurprisingly. Vaccines, particularly the COVID vaccine. And RFK is, I say unsurprisingly because RFK is kind of known around the league for his rather cavalier opinions on all vaccines, really, not specific to the COVID vaccines. I find him very enjoyable to listen to. I'm glad he's running for president. Whether or not I intend to vote for him does not matter. Personally, I think having a viable third-party contender in a general election is a pretty good thing for American democracy. And most of the criticisms that you'll see against RFK, I'm sticking with RFK, by the way. I'm not going Bobby Kennedy. Most of the criticisms you'll see come from the party that he, I guess, thought, at least, he believed was his party, the Democrats. I mean, he ran as a Democrat in this election cycle, in the primaries, until he, in his own words, was ousted, that the nomination was kind of fixed against him, which should come as... again, not a surprise. We've seen that happen before, Bernie Sanders. And so now he's running as an independent, which, again, I think you'd be hard-pressed, regardless of who you're voting for, or if you're voting at all, to make the argument that this is less desirable than our current two-party duopoly that has been basically controlling the entire landscape of American politics for the past more than a century, just about. Just Democrats and Republicans, those are your two choices. And if they both happen to be controlled by the same people, lesser of two evils, right? I'm not saying that's the case for this election, but it has been the case for most of them. But let's dive right into this clip because there's a lot to unpack here. I want to obviously address Bobby K's claims. I want to address Bill Maher's rebuttals, claims of his own. I want to talk a little bit, fairly briefly, about Trump's response on Truth Social, his truth that he truthed on Truth Social, which is kind of entertaining, to say the least. And then maybe we'll take a little stroll down COVID lane and talk about just some facts, some statistics, some ideas that I find to be compelling in this argument that I think should probably resonate, hopefully, with anyone watching this, regardless of where you line up on the political aisle. I'm trying to be as objective as possible here in this conversation because I understand that this is a very divisive subject. But before we do anything, folks, I got to do it, don't I? Yeah, I got to do it. I got to be that guy. The YouTube guy. Hey, y'all. If you're digging what you're seeing, remember, new content on the channel every Monday through Friday. And the best way to see when we release new videos is to click the subscription box below. Leave us a like or a comment and tell us what you think. Is that good? That was good. See, if I do an impression of a YouTube douche, then I don't have to be a YouTube douche, right? That's how that works. Good. Groovy.
But your vice presidential pick wants to recall the Moderna vaccine. That's the one I got.
She's not going to.
Well, do you agree with that? Recall it.
I think I think those vaccines we need to have, again, true double-blind placebo-controlled trials on that. There's 25% of Americans who believe that they know somebody who was killed by a COVID vaccine.
Killed?
Killed. 25% of Americans, 52% of Americans believe that the vaccines are causing injuries, including death. 52%. If you look at the clinical trial studies, the actual studies that were done, that were released, of the Pfizer vaccine, Moderna has not released it. If you look at the Pfizer vaccine, there were 22,000 people in the placebo group, 22,000 people who got the actual vaccine. And the people who got the vaccine had a 23% higher death rate from all causes at the end of that study.
But that could not be the disease itself?
No, well,
because we know that
if it is, then the vaccine doesn't work, does it?
Well, it's certainly. Well, no, that's not true at all. And I'm somebody who did not
Hey! It's not true at all.
want the vaccine and didn't think I should have been made to get it. But it does work.
Wait a minute.
Work in the sense that if you were many people who would have died because they were not in good health. It killed mostly the obese and the very elderly. Okay, those people should.
Are we talking about
those people are alive today, I think, because of the vaccine. I think that's the truth. Does it also have complications? Yes. I mean, anecdotally, I have not heard about 1 out of 4 people dying, but I know a lot of people who've had issues. Yes, but they could have had worse issues if they got the disease. That's the thing. Medicine is always. So I just am for, let's make it a case-by-case basis. Certainly.
Well, I agree with that, too. I believe that people want a vaccine, that they should be able to get it. I'm not anti-vaccine. What I say is that...
Well, people think you are.
Well, I know, but that's because I'm called that because it's a way of silencing me. But I have said for 17 years, I'm not anti-vaccine. I just want good science. I want people should be able to make informed choices. I am against vaccine mandates.
Why can't... I am, too.
I'm not against vaccine.
Solid, not so solid points made on both sides, and a couple solid points made on both sides. As Trump would say, good points on both sides. Now, let's take it from the top, I guess. RFK opens up with, I'm going to call it a good point sandwich. And that's because he makes 3 points, 2 of which are not so great. And then 1 is good, a valid point. The 2 points I'm referring to as not so great are the opinion polls. I think the first thing he cites is that 25% of Americans believe that they know someone who was killed by the COVID vaccine. And the second one is that 52% of Americans believe, I can't quite remember off the top of my head from 1 minute ago for some reason, but you remember. There were 2 opinion polls. Now, I don't think that those are necessarily citable in the context of a scientific conversation. To be fair, I have the utmost respect for RFK. I think he definitely knows what the hell he's talking about, well more than people give him credit for. But to cite belief polls, a certain percentage of people believe a lot of stuff. I'm not surprised that X% of people believe blank. That doesn't necessarily mean anything at all, really. But the third point he makes, that of the COVID vaccinated group, all-cause deaths were 23% higher in the Pfizer clinical trials that they released, and the fact that Moderna has not released theirs. That's something, right? That's not something to be overlooked. 23% higher is, I'd say, worth taking a look at. And then Bill Maher responds with a couple weak points of his own, and I like to call this lib logic. Because this is the most common argument that you'll hear from your more liberal friends. And I'm not saying that at its base that there aren't good arguments for the vaccine, but I am saying that the arguments that you normally hear it reminds me of, if you guys remember the movie Billy Madison with Adam Sandler, where he he's like fucking like 20 something years old. He has to go back to school and whatever. It's classic. And there's a scene with him outside of the bus when they're on a field trip, and the bus driver is Chris Farley. And this scene has been memed. You guys all remember it, I'm sure. But he's standing outside, and Chris Farley is like, "That Veronica Vaughn is one piece of ace. You know, I would know from experience." And then Adam Sandler's like, "No, you don't." And he's like, "Yeah, but friend of mine, they totally got it on." And Adam Sandler's like, "That didn't happen." And then Chris Farley's like, "Yeah, but can you imagine if it did?" And that's kind of the vaccine argument from most people. When you talk to them, they'll be like, vaccine kept me from getting COVID. And you're like, no, it didn't. You got COVID, like more than me. Like literally more than me. And then they're like, yeah, but totally kept me from getting sick. And then you're like, no, it didn't. You totally got sick. In fact, I haven't even been sick with COVID in like a year. And they're like, yeah, but can you imagine if I didn't have the vaccine though? As if to say, yeah, I got COVID. Sure, I got sick. But if I didn't have the vaccine, I'd probably be dead. And there's really no way of proving that. It's just a completely like not even hypothetical. It's just like a alternate universe argument. It's like, yes, I got COVID. Yes, I got sick, but I'd probably be dead if I didn't have the vaccine. How do you know? How do you know that? How do you know for sure that you definitely would have been sicker if you didn't have the vaccine? There's really no way of proving that. That's what Bill Maher is saying in here. He goes, well, I believe that a lot of these people that are obese and have pre-existing conditions would be, that saved their lives. And it's like, maybe. Now, again, I said that it's not to say that there aren't valid arguments on that side, because there is scientific data that suggests that the hospitalization rate and the rate of mortality among the vaccinated proportionately is lower than that among the unvaccinated. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I just felt the need to kind of point out the sort of like gut feeling arguments that were brought from both ends there. That the only real scientific data that was cited in this discussion was by RFK. And that was, again, that during the trials, they found that death as a result of any cause was 23% higher among the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. That is something I would consider statistically significant, something worth looking into, something worth talking about. And depending on where you align on the political spectrum, you won't hear that ever. You won't. And there could be a myriad of reasons, but that's what science is about, right? Like, you're not supposed to have a religious adherence to a belief, especially if that belief is in a pharmaceutical product. You're not supposed to have a sense of blasphemy if somebody says that Pfizer's vaccine may have some unspoken for side effects or negative causes. That's not supposed to raise a, you can't say that. But that is the reaction you get from a lot of people. Now, again, we're gonna talk more in depth about those studies, what I would consider to be a fairly fair way to interpret them. But first, let's take a look at Trump's response to this. Before we go any further, we gotta hear what Trump truthed on Truth.
So Donald Trump puts out this long truth. God, the character limit really was good for him. This is way too long. He says, I actually watched for the first time in a long time ratings challenged Bill Maher's really boring interview with RFK Jr. RFK, only to find Jr. is far more liberal than Maher, and in fact, far more liberal than anyone else running as a Democrat, including West and Stein. Yet, despite this, he has no hope as a Democrat because they were able to use their typically fascist repression, blah, 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 throw him out of the party like a dog. So now Junior's a so-called independent, but he's not. He's a radical left-wing lunatic trying to have it all way. He says that no vaccine is safe and effective, and then said, I would never say I'm not anti-vaccine. Where did that come from? Maher defended the vaccine, which Junior seemed to agree. Wow. And then told him his poll numbers have crashed. No Republican can vote for this guy. Hashtag MAGA 2024. No idea what Trump is trying to say there exactly, Crystal, but I think what he can sense, at least correctly, is that A, vaccine politics is disproportionately going to resonate with people who are right-wing, and that therefore something like RFK Jr. there citing those numbers, which probably disproportionately going to be Republicans or Republican-leaning voters, and Trump's not an idiot. He can read a poll. How many internal polls now does he probably able to see now that confirm a lot of the reporting we've had here on this show and elsewhere that RFK Jr. actually could end up affecting Trump and drawing more from his voters than anybody else in the election.
Yeah, and so I think most Americans overwhelmingly have moved on from COVID politics.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we're talking, this was years ago now. Right. But there is still a core base on the right in particular that is still this is a big thing for them. And it's one of the areas where Trump's more vulnerable because he did Operation Warp Speed and he continued even as the Republican base went to the anti-vax side pretty hard. He continued to defend the vaccines and at time faced some blowback over that. So I think he feels a little bit vulnerable. Not that this is going to be a huge wave of support from his group to RFK Jr.'s group, but I think he feels that this is an issue where he's a little bit vulnerable to losing some percentage points. I do want to, he does make a point about RFK Jr. that I think.
All right, that's enough out of you kind of sexy liberal lady. I'm going to hang on to one thing she said there that I don't think it's correct. And that is that most Americans have moved on from COVID politics. I agree that maybe technically that is true. Assuming that pretty much every Democrat, I would say, liberals have pretty much moved on from COVID politics. Even the ones that are still wearing masks for no reason. I think that, as we mentioned on Friday, I think the mask means free Palestine now. I think the mask has nothing to do with COVID. All I know is, for whatever reason, if you find yourself at a protest, you wear a mask. And I just think it's a symbol of a political lenience. And I think it always was. But that's not exactly an example of COVID politics being relevant. But for the other side of the aisle, the other half of the country, COVID is not a thing in our daily lives for anyone anymore, really. Unless, again, you're way off your rocker at this point. But the politics of COVID are incredibly relevant to particularly the conservative side of the aisle. The old saying, forgive, but do not forget, comes to mind because the conservative friends of yours, or yourself if you are a conservative, which I admittedly definitely lean conservative for sure. I'll speak for myself. I have not forgotten the shit show that was 2020 through 2022. I have not forgotten the lockdowns that cost me to lose my job. I have not forgotten the ridiculous, nonsensical mask policies that were based off of not really any science. I mean, there's no science. There is no science that proves that if you drive around with a shitty, 10-cent blue COVID mask that hangs off your rearview mirror half the time and sits on your passenger seat when you're driving, and you wear that in and out of everywhere you go, basically until you lose it. There's no science that suggests that that's stopping the spread or in any way protecting you from the virus. There is no science that suggests that. Perhaps you could make the case that when a mask is used in ideal conditions, like at a hospital, when you walk into a room with a mask and then you do what you got to do in there and you immediately take it off as soon as you're in the room and you sanitize, and you go into the next room, you put on an entirely different gown, an entirely different mask. Okay, maybe. But even then, half the people are wearing those freaking stupid neck gaiters that people wear to do like motocross. Like, those aren't doing anything. Like, the whole thing was ridiculous. And the mask mandates, again, the lockdowns, the division it caused among people, the politicization of science to where science took second chair to politics. Conservatives in particular remember all of that. In very many ways, 2024, although we currently sit here in late April, with an entirely new slate of biggest deals in the world. They're ever changing. We got Israel-Palestine. We got Ukraine kind of popping back up into relevance. We got the border. We never got rid of inflation. And, whatever. I could sit here maybe, give me 10 minutes. I could find 30 other things that are the biggest deal in the world right now. But in many ways, COVID and what happened during that time, the election itself of 2020, is still very much in people's minds. That is not a settled issue for a significant portion of the country, regardless of how much people want to ignore that reality. Kind of the demonization of conservatives in general as a result of January 6th, which I would say pretty much everyone agrees was overblown if they're being honest, but only a certain portion of people will actually admit that, and that would, of course, be the conservatives. All that still exists. This is a literal rematch between Trump and Biden. This is unfinished business. To think that, alluding back to the bygone era of 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, or whatever, when people were literally being threatened to lose their job, not allowed to go grocery shopping, not allowed to get into certain restaurants, when all that was happening, to think that that is just forgotten about, that's incorrect. I'm sorry. And I forgive you, Crystal Ball, your literal name. But the other thing is, Trump understands that as well. And if we're being honest, the issue of the vaccine is one of the few things that I would say definitely is a disconnect between Trump and his base. And his base pretty much just ignores that. They do. the majority of Trump supporters, don't ask me how I know this, but the majority of Trump supporters are skeptical, not necessarily about the vaccine itself, but how it was sold to us and how the goalposts continued to move. And again, how opinions seem to shift arbitrarily based off of what was politically convenient at the time. Remember, the COVID vaccine was developed under the Trump administration. The vaccine that every single woke, liberal person, Democrat, insists on taking was developed by Trump. And in some weird twist of irony, it wound up being the Trump supporters who were most likely to be skeptical of it, among many other minority communities who also rightfully so were very skeptical of any, mandated injection thing developed by the government. Perfectly understandable. But that wasn't always the case with Trump supporters. There was a time when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were running on the ticket for the 2020 election and had not been elected yet, that they were on the air saying that they would not trust a Trump vaccine. They said, look, if all the medical professionals come out and convince me that it's safe, blah, 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 but no, I would not take Trump's word for it. I would not trust that. I would not inject myself. So in a weird way, it was kind of the Democrat. I mean, if you want to put Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the literal president and vice president of the country for the Democratic Party, as adequate representation of the Democrat platform at that time, I think it is very fair to say that there was a time in this country when the anti-vax sentiment was coming more so from the left because they acknowledged that it was being developed by Trump, who they did not trust. And then as soon as Biden got into office, it was immediately the best thing in the world. And you're a piece of shit if you have any skepticism about it at all. Remember 2 months ago when we were totally skeptical of it because it was developed by Trump? Well, now you are a racist or somehow, I don't know. Racist just means everything now. You're a racist. You're a sexist and a xenophobe and a climate denier if you don't take the facts. It was amazing how that changed. And people did not forget about that. I didn't forget about my friends being annoying about it. So that's that. It's very relevant, and that's why Trump is addressing it. Now, whether or not this truth, or whatever you want to call it, comes off as well put together, I think it's safe to say he could have used an editor on that one. Could have trimmed it back a little bit. He could have been more concise. It does have a very kind of sporadic rantiness to it about it that is not necessarily becoming. And I generally, I said this when he would come after DeSantis as well. I'm not a big fan of when Trump comes after people that are mostly on his side. And I consider RFK mostly on Trump's side. I know they're running against each other. We get that. But if you just look at, if you look around, you don't need to cite opinion polls for this. Not everything needs a citation. Not everything needs a reference. Some things are just like obviously true. And there are plenty of polls that back up what I'm saying, but I'm not even going to bother referencing them because this is obviously true. And the obvious truth is that Republicans are far more sympathetic to RFK and his positions than Democrats. The Democratic establishment does not even want to acknowledge RFK's existence. The average Democrat isn't even aware that RFK was running as a Democrat because all liberal media was painting him as this terrible, awful guy. And I think most people just assumed, oh, he must be some Republican guy. Because why would they treat a Democrat this harshly? So there is a lot of crossover between Trump and RFK in terms of the base. Now, whether or not that is actually going to affect Trump's turnout, I don't actually think so. I think I commented on the Sunday show because the Sunday special on Ben Shapiro's channel, because RFK made an appearance on that as well yesterday. And I said RFK 2028. Because if Trump wins this year, he's done. And so I can't think of anybody in the political realm that I gravitate more to than RFK. I mean, there's guys on the conservative side like Vivek and stuff like that, but Vivek's like 8 years older than me. He's got time. Ron DeSantis got time. RFK is prime presidential age. He's got gray hair. He's ready to go. I'd vote for that guy. I think most Trump supporters would vote for that guy if he weren't running against Trump. But you must acknowledge that the fact that Trump is coming at RFK in this way, whether or not it is the case that RFK is a threat to Trump's turnout, he's certainly treating it like it is. Would you not agree? He's certainly by him attacking RFK, he doesn't have to, but he recognizes that RFK in raising skepticism about the vaccine is something that is one issue that he's more Trump than Trump. I mean, really. When I say he's more Trump than Trump, I mean that the Trump base is more receptive to RFK's vaccine skepticism than Trump's consistent defense of the vaccine. Right or wrong, it's just true. It just is. So that is one issue that Trump does lose to RFK in his own base, if we're being honest. Because Trump can't come out and say that his own vaccine was overhyped and over-advertised, over-marketed, and under-effective. He can't do that because that was his vaccine, technically, under his administration. But all in all, you saw the same thing with Ron DeSantis. I wasn't a big fan of how he came after Ron like that. I think I'm not a politician, obviously, but I would imagine there's got to be a better way to criticize your opponents that aren't actually your opponents. There's a difference between a Joe Biden and a Ron DeSantis. Joe Biden is never going to say Trump's a good dude. Joe Biden is never going to get behind Trump the same way Trump is never going to get behind Joe Biden, regardless of who wins or loses. But guys like Vivek, Ron DeSantis, those are guys that are 100% going, all politics aside. I hate that aspect of politics where it's everybody's got to pretend like everybody's the worst person ever. And the second the election's over, all of a sudden, you got to vote for him, like the Republican primaries. I hate that shit. It's phony because it is phony. You can't literally sit there. That's why I lost respect for Bernie Sanders, because he's literally sitting there during the 2016 primaries saying Hillary Clinton is everything wrong with American politics. And then he gets cheated out of the nomination by many accounts. And then instead of even doing what RFK does, which is just run as an independent, which I highly respect, again, he instead just rolls over and backs Hillary Clinton. This is the same person you just said was the worst person for American politics or everything wrong with it. How can you can't say that and then 1 month later fully support her? I'm sorry. I can't respect a person like that. So, I don't know. There's a political angle to it. I think, I fuck with Trump. I'm just going to come clean and say it. I do. Get over it. Change the channel. Whatever you got to do. I definitely fuck with Trump. But I think these are moments that are not his best. I think when he's attacking people like RFK and Ron DeSantis, other people that his own base hold in high regard, it doesn't do anybody any favors to be dividing the base up like that. It just doesn't, I think there's a way to say, dude, you're wrong, without being like, this guy's a liberal, lefty, plant, loony bin, hack, whatever. It's like, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I feel like I have a pretty good sense of when somebody's full of shit. I have good phony-dar. And I'm not getting a single bleep when I listen to RFK. So, whatever. Anyway, that's that. That's that. But I want to kind of talk about just the vaccine in general and just kind of revisit. We already kind of touched upon it a little bit, but I want to talk about kind of why COVID politics still matters. And what COVID politics told us, why it was so incredibly, it exposed every negative aspect of how our country works in a very short period of time. And I, for one, and pretty much everyone, whether we recognize it or not, we're all still processing it. We're still recovering from it. You know? It's not over, it's just done. If that makes any sense. It's not over. When the vaccine was released, when it was made available to the public, the selling point, understandably so, or the way that first of all, the way that most people understood the vaccine is the conventional definition of a vaccine, which is something that immunizes you to the disease. This was the definition of a vaccine up until like March 2021. Like, when you think of a vaccine, you understand that there are breakthrough cases. Breakthrough cases, of course, being when you're vaccinated but still become infected with the disease. That happens. No vaccine is 100% effective. Vaccines like the polio vaccine are something like 99.99% effective. So like maybe 1 in every million cases or 1,000 cases or whatever, something ridiculous may break through. But that's an example of a truly like almost flawless vaccine. But breakthrough implies that it's abnormal. And most people, I think, genuinely, and it was pitched to us by the media and by our leaders, Fauci and the like, that it was all but said, all but indicated that the vaccine, once you were vaccinated, once people got vaccinated, it was gonna end COVID. You were pretty much gonna have like not really a big chance of getting it. You weren't gonna spread it. That was the big thing, the spreading thing. The spreading thing is the main thing. I think most people assumed it was going to make you immune because that's the conventional understanding of a vaccine, because that's what most vaccines are effective at doing. But even more than that, the actual primary basis for all of the politics that surrounded the vaccine was all based off of the spread. And how do I know that? Because how many times were you told that the vaccine isn't about you, it's about everyone else? It's selfish not to get vaccinated. Why would it be selfish not to get vaccinated? Well, because if you're not vaccinated, then you can carry the disease and spread it. And that makes it more dangerous for the people around you. And that allows the vaccine, and this is a big one, to mutate. Because the more it can infect people, the more opportunity it has to mutate, create new variants that can fight off the immunization from the previous, most recent vaccine. But once we realized that literally everyone, and this is the thing, anecdotally speaking, every single person you know that was vaccinated got COVID more than you. That's just something I've noticed. Now, again, I'm admitting that's anecdotal, but I can tell you for a fact that most of my friends are vaccinated, and every one of them motherfuckers was getting it like 2-3 times a year. I'm trying to book gigs. Oh, he's got COVID. I need to find a replacement. Do podcasts with people. Oh shit, they can't do it this week. They got COVID. That's just, look, I'm not saying that's scientific, but I feel like I'm definitely not the only person in the world that has had that experience. I didn't get vaccinated, if you couldn't tell. I don't think I've had COVID since like before COVID was COVID. I'm pretty sure I got it in like or like December 2019 moving into January, when COVID was technically around, but it wasn't being talked about yet. COVID didn't really become COVID until like late February of 2020. Before that, like maybe early February, I remember like people didn't even call it COVID back then. They called it coronavirus. I understand the difference. I understand coronavirus is the virus, SARS-CoV-2, and COVID's a disease, but everybody just said like, oh, I got corona. Everybody would say I got corona. It was like 5 months in, everybody started saying I got COVID. I used to say that people that said COVID were like weed guys that say cannabis. Like, shut up, just say corona. But now nobody says corona anymore. Nobody says I got corona. I got the rona. Everybody says I got COVID. So the vocab changed. But I'm pretty sure I got it in like, yeah, I was sicker than I had ever been, and for like 3 weeks. Like from before Christmas until like 2 weeks after New Year's. I remember being really, really sick. I didn't call out of a single gig because I'm a fucking man and I work for a living. But, you know, maybe if I was you, I would have. I was that sick. And then I don't think I ever got it again because I don't remember really ever being sick since then on any significant level. Now, I wasn't out there getting tested all the time, so maybe I did get it and just didn't know. But certainly, no, I was never more sick than what felt like a normal amount to be sick, you know, when you were just allowed to be sick without it being a world-ending event, you know? Remember before COVID when you could just be sick? Like, you'd be laid up in bed. Like, people would be describing what it was like. Oh, my God, dude, I had COVID. Dude, for 2 days, I was literally, like, in bed, coughing, throwing up, fucking muscles were achy, didn't have an appetite. Oh, man, it's like, that you're just describing being sick, dude. Just because it was COVID doesn't automatically mean that it was the worst sickness ever, because we forgot about the flu and the cold and every other disease that also exists that we're not shutting down the world for. I'm not saying the vaccines didn't work at all. I am saying that there's a lot of things that need to be examined that weren't allowed to be questioned in public. When you had a mass crusade against Rogan by mainstream media, or I'm sorry, legacy media, because Rogan is more mainstream than CNN or any of those guys. But when you had a mass crusade from corporate media and all these other artists and influencers and things like that, demonizing Rogan and anybody who came out, including actual doctors who actually developed the science for these vaccines, and that was branded as misinformation, dangerous, harmful to the American public, that was all provably true. You have a problem. Okay? So I am interested to know who knows why the vaccinated are 23% more likely to die in general of any particular cause than the unvaccinated. Who knows why that is? But if you were an actual science-minded person, you would want to actually know the answer to that and not instead be religiously attached to an ideology that says that any questioning or skepticism or you know, undermining of the vaccine is blasphemy. You can't do it. You're a vax denier. You're an anti-vaxxer. If you even say true shit. Who's the scientist? Who's the religious cultist now? You know, you see this reaction all the time. You know, if somebody says, you know, are vaccines potentially involved in the rise in autism? You can't say that. People lose their fucking minds. If RFK or anyone really comes out and says like maybe we should be looking into that. Like, why is it that we have such a massive uptick in autism? What could explain that? Could it be correlated with the massive rise in pharmaceuticals, not just vaccines, but SSRIs, stimulants, amphetamines, all these fucking drugs that people are getting put on from a young age, including the massively inflated vaccine schedule, even as compared to, a few decades ago. And even the asking of that question conjures such an immediate visceral rejection response from a large group of people in this country. And you wonder, how does that happen? Why is it that you're so religiously attached to defending some big pharma company's product? What is that? Genuinely ask yourself, why do you care so much if somebody questions that Pfizer or Moderna may be overblowing the effectiveness of their product that raised their stock prices like triple? I don't know. I don't get it. The point is that these are all relevant things to consider. They're all relevant things to consider. And it doesn't make RFK an anti-vaxxer for talking about that. It makes you anti-science for hearing everything I just said and not even being open to the consideration that perhaps some of it may be worth looking into. Folks, I may have ventured far beyond my breadth on this episode, but that's all right. That's what we do here sometimes. We're just going for it. It's a Monday. This is live from the studio. Click subscribe. Leave us a like. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. Honestly, I want to know. Otherwise, my name is Jimmy Selesky. Till next time. Peace.